All right, welcome to everybody that is joining for a day of ShopBot training. Today we're going to look at stacked text or stacked designs. Uh, as I've been preparing for this, been thinking about Seinfeld, the episode, if you're familiar with Seinfeld, where Kramer is wanting to rearrange his apartment's set up as levels. Uh, so when we're creating a stacked design or stacked layers text, we need to think about layers and levels. Um, I'm going to get started. Hopefully everyone's able to hear me out there. My name is Ryan Patterson, and I'm going to get started. Hopefully somebody could confirm that you're hearing me all right. We are going to be recording this, have it recorded. At the end, we'll open it up for questions and answers. We'll allow everybody to unmute. And through the process, take about an hour or so through this. If you have any questions, you can use the chat window and just ask the question. I kind of try to keep an eye on that as we move along. But stack text or stack designs, we're really going to first focus on text, and this is like text on top of one another. And we could see as an example of what I've created here, to where we have one, two, three different layers or levels here. And as we look at it in the two-dimensional view, it kind of looks a little different, a little odd. In the first core thing we have to really remember is to separate the items in looking at each set of vectors or each design as one layer at a time. So to jump into this, we're going to just start a new job. So I'm just going to right click down here and start a new Aspire. And everything that I'm showing here, even though I'm working in Aspire, everything here is also can be done in VCarve Pro just exactly the same way. What we see today, there is no difference between Aspire and VCarve Pro. We're not even going to get into the modeling tab today. So with the new instance open, we're going to go ahead and create a new file. I'm going to enter in the job size. I'm going to make this a fairly larger piece, 24 inches wide by 8 inches high, and material thickness of 3/4. I'm going to zero to the material surface. In this case, I'm more worried about depth of these layers rather than cutting all the way through. Most everything is from a top-down cut, and the only cut through we're going to be doing is the final cutout pass. So that is why I'm going to set it to material surface. But again, setting one versus the other really doesn't matter, as long as whatever you do here, you set your machine up to be the same. XY to the lower left, and selecting OK. This gives us our job size. The first thing we're going to do is enter in some text. So coming over to create vectors, creating a draw text, and specifying the text. Just I'm going to do a family. I might want to have all of that capitalized. And it's quite large. So the last job that I must have been doing was doing some fairly large text. So we could reduce that. I'm going to bring that down to 4 inches. And again, when I'm designing, I don't worry too much about the placement or the anchor points in any of the drawing tools. I use the alignment tools later to place these. If I wanted to, we can specify exactly where it's being placed. But again, I like to do it on the drawing side. So we're going to close this. Now with, I'm just going to kind of center that up. We could also use the alignment tools to center that on the job. And close. So the next thing that we want to do is create or put text on top of this. And same process to draw out some text. And it is already selected, so I have to unselect that. And I'm just going to type in my last name and change the size of it. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, say 2.5, maybe. And move that over on top of there just to see how that thing kind of lines up all right. So I'm going to close. So the next process is creating the positioning of and aligning both of these text in the same place. So there's a couple areas that you could do it. We could lower it, set it to the bottom left here to have the family, and then the text below that is, I'm going to try to see what that looks like compared to what I have done here, where in this version, I had it centered in both. I'm going to try to see what it looks like if we just align it to the lower right. So to do that, we're going to use, or I'm going to use, the alignment tools. And I want to align my last name with the word family to the outside edge and to the bottom. So the first thing that I always like to do in creating, when you start manipulating vectors and moving them around, it's always nice to have an original copy or a safe copy, an untouched copy of any vector. So if something did happen, you're always able to kind of come back to it. And to do this, I'm going to use the layer tools. We have a tab down here for layers. And by default, we only have one layer here. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to copy the vectors that we have onto that new layer and just call that safe. So to be able to do that, I'm just going to select all of our text and all the vectors that I want, do a right click, and I'm going to come down to the bottom that says copy to layer. And I'm going to say to a new layer. So I'm going to make a copy or a duplicate of what is already existing to a new layer and simply call that safe, and know that that is going to be like an untouched layer. I'm not going to hopefully ever need it, but it's there just in case I need it. And as we can see, we do have both of them there. I could turn off one, turn on the other. I'm just going to leave that safe turned off and only work on the layer one. And to help with the visually of my layers a little bit, I'm going to move that safe layer up to the top, just so that I know that's the top. I'm not going to get it confused with any of the others. So now we have to start thinking about our levels and our layers. How many levels are we going to have? We're going to start off with 2, and then maybe if time, we'll add a third to see, and just to see how easy it is to be able to start stacking text on top of one another. So the next thing we're going to do is separate our vectors now into 2 layers. I'm going to do top and bottom. So again, selecting all our text, right-clicking, copy to new layer, and call this bottom. And then once more, or actually what I'm going to do this time is we have this layer 1 that has all of that same data on it. I'm just going to right-click on that and rename it, and I'm going to call that top. So we now have a total of 3 layers. All 3 layers are identical at this point in time. The safe layer, again, we're not going to touch it. We're going to start with the bottom and work up. So it's kind of a bottom up, then top down. And the reason why I say it that way is when I'm working with the design, I tend to start thinking about the bottom layer first and then work my way up to the top layer. But then when I go to Toolpath and create the cutting code for this, and I will start at the top and work my way down. So it's a bottom to top and a top to bottom. So with the bottom selected and the bottom turned on and only the bottom turned on, we're going to the drawing tools. Now what we're going to be doing to create this stacked text is creating a pocketing toolpath that is able to go around the outside of all of these letters here. And we need to have kind of a blend or a merge between the two levels. For the base layer, we need to have the Patterson merged in with the text family. So to do that, there's a couple ways of doing it. One, I'll show the hard way first, just so we could see what is happening and understand what is going to happen. So I'm going to convert both of the text. I'm going to convert those to curves. So now we hope everything is spelt right because we can't change the text. I'll end up undoing this, but I'm just going to kind of quickly explain what we are going to do to create this, this pattern, or kind of how to merge these together. So basically this P and everything inside of this letter A needs to be removed. And the same thing with anything that's inside of there. So basically what we're going to do is kind of go around with scissors, although we are not going to use these scissors to do so, but we want to create some sort of a pattern like this. So we have a first layer, base layer, to be able to pocket around. So I'm just going to do an undo to get back to our original. And we are now back to our original product where it is again text, and we are able to modify it if we did see any spelling errors. But we have a more automatic way of doing that, because going through and trimming all of that out could get pretty tedious and cause some things to miss. There is this welding tool that we have over under weld selected vectors. So selecting that, we get a message up here that says some of this is text. It's going to have to convert those to curves. And what it's asking us right now, once it is converted to curves, do we also want to make a duplicate or keep the original? I'm going to say no. I'm going to replace, just do a replace, because remember we did save that safe layer. So I'm just going to select replace. And as we can see, it has removed all of those letters as I was going to do with those scissors. Kind of blends that together. That now allows us to create a toolpath for a pocketing around the outside of all of these letters. And before we were able to create that pocketing, we would need a border wrapped around this. But before we go for that, I'm going to take a look at the layer 2 or the top layer. So to do that, going to the layers tab, I'm going to turn the bottom layer off and turn the top layer on. Now for this layer, we really have the family part of this text is not part of the top layer. So just going to simply select the text family and delete it. So at this point, the only two that we have is the top layer, bottom layer. Now we can see how they're kind of merged and blended back together again. And this gives us two versions to be able to select. So selecting down here is going to be our base layer. Once that is removed, we will then be able to toolpath and cut the top layer. So the final thing that we need to be able to do for pocketing this out is a outside border to be able to create the pocketing toolpath for. And I want to create a pocket that matches and evenly has a gap all the way around our text. So to do that, I'm certain there's probably a better way than what I'm going to do. But what I'm going to do right here is look at selecting everything and looking at the bottom left or the bottom right. And it gives me a width and a height of the selected objects. So I'm 22.062 and 4 inches. So with that selected, I'm going to go in, or with knowing the size now, I'm going to go in to create a draw rectangle. And as I said earlier, I'm not too worried about placement. I'm just worried more about the getting one there and setting the size. So just quickly sketched out the rectangle, and now I'm going to specify the size by 22.1062 and 4 inches high. Selecting apply. That now gives us a rectangle that is the same size as our text. So to center that, I could possibly just center it within the job, but I cannot remember if I actually centered our text within that job. So I'm going to center it and align it to itself. And to be able to do that, I need to have that as a grouped item. I'm just going to temporarily group it just to allow for this centering process. So selecting all of those objects and typing the letter G is going to group that together. That now allows us to use the centering tools. So I'm going to select the rectangle, then the grouped text, come to alignment, and then center. Now select that and ungroup. And it does, just to point out, our layers and levels. When you are working within and you're wondering what layer an object is on, when you select an object in the bottom right, along with the width and the height, it does give a specified size or the layer name. So we're able to see that they are separate. I just wanted to confirm that I was still on separate layers from when we grouped and ungrouped to make sure that they didn't get put all onto the same layer through that process. So now for the border, they use the offset tool to be able to select outwards. Offsetting outwards, 3/8 of an inch. Outwards is good. Select apply. And then I have the offset to be able to select the new. So I'm going to select offset once more, and that is going to allow us to get a 3/8 border that is with the text inset 3/8 from the inner border. I no longer need this vector for that rectangle that was only used to be able to offset outwards equally to have the same border around the text, and selecting delete. So at this point, we are ready to create some toolpaths for this. Through the process, it's always good to go file save, just to make sure that if power goes out, you don't lose any of that data. So we are good there. And let's jump over to the toolpath side and going to look at this as layers in themselves and levels. So first thing also going to do before we do that is going to move our border off onto a new layer. I'm not going to make a copy this time. I'm just going to go to move to a new layer, and we'll call that border. All right. So now with the that done, we're going to jump over to the toolpaths and going to only toolpath the top section first. So I'm going to turn the bottom layer off, jump over to the toolpath side, and going to create a pocketing toolpath. The size of the bit that we want to use, really going to take two. I don't want to have a small detailed bit to go around everywhere, but it's looking like I am going to need a smaller bit to get into some of this detail to be in here. Now, one trick to use to determine how big or small of a bit that you need before actually going through and previewing everything, I'm just going to jump back over to the drawing side again. And I'm going to draw out a circle. And I'm going to specify the diameter of this circle to be, now let's go with an 1/8 inch first, 0.25, and just going to click create. And this allows me to now kind of move this circle around to see if an 1/8" bit, um, just kind of simulating what that is looking like. And it might be all right. I'm going to start out with a 1/8" bit for this and see what happens. Now notice when I did draw that, like automatically everything came back. The bottom layer was turned back on. The reason that it was turned back on is when I went to the layer, the bottom layer is the currently selected layer. So even though I have it turned off, it is still the active layer. So any newly drawn objects are still going to get placed on the bottom layer. To change the selection of the layer, you would simply select the layer that you want to have active. You could also use the toggle drop down box on top here. So now we are ready to create some toolpaths. And to create this, I'm going to simply select the inside border and then the top layer text and come into Pocket Toolpath. I'm going to go down in for this first layer of 0.1. Now we're going to want to remember that 0.1. We'll be using that later. And I'm going to change this tool from a 16th. I'm going to go up to an 1/8". And then come down, and I am going to give this a name. I always talk about giving logical names in your toolpaths. I think it's even more critical to give them logical names when you're working with stacked designs. It helps keep the mind clear and understand what level we're working on, what is what. So I'm going to call this top for it being the top layer and select calculate. At this point, we will preview what this looks like. Just do a preview here. See with the slowness of this, I have my toolpath preview set to high level. All right, so that is the first layer. To help distinguish and see this a little bit better, I'm going to use the Toolpath Coloring. So typically you might have it set to material color. This time I am going to come down here and set the Toolpath color, which is this top layer. And let's just give it a gold color. And that is the area that the 1/8" bit is picking up. Going to do the same thing for the top roughing pass. Going to set that toolpath color to gold as well. And we can see that now we are have a raised lettering of that 0.1 inches. Now it's time to create the toolpath for the bottom layer. And to do that, I'm going to come in here and turn the top layer off and turn the bottom layer on, and also select the bottom to make it the current layer. And going to run the similar pocketing toolpath, going into create a pocket toolpath, selecting the inside border, and then all of the objects that I want to pocket around. We have 1/8" cutter, just the same way as used before. Our cutting depth for in this next layer, I also want to be this 0.1. Now we've already removed 0.1 material across here. So there's two ways that I could do this. One isn't necessarily more correct than the other. So we'll do one first. I could just come in here and say that I want to cut down to 0.2. Or I could change the start depth to 0.1. So now we've already removed and start depth at what we have already removed of that 0.1, and then cut down another 0.1 from that, which is going to be in total of 0.2. Coming down and giving it a name of bottom. and selecting Calculate. So at this point, we will preview the visible toolpaths. I already have the one previewed, so we won't waste the time watching that one and only preview the visible toolpaths. All right, so there it is. To help more clearly see that, I'm going to set the color for the bottom to a different color. So with a green background. Green. Let's try blue. All right. So that is kind of the basics of creating a stacked text. The key again here is remembering and knowing where our levels are and at what height these levels are. So we're going to take a look at maybe adding another layer to this before I get into more depth or more detail and adding another layer or level to this. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to use the chat window. And at this point, I will get brave and allow people to unmute themselves. And if you have any questions, you could just unmute yourself and ask it. So just to confirm our different levels or heights, on the 3D preview side, they are, you can hover your mouse over top of the areas, and in the bottom right section down here, it gives you the X, Y, and the Z value for this. So knowing that this is the top, which is at 0, then we have the section here, which is our main family, and we can see that's a -0.1, and hovering over the blue, we're down to a -0.2. So we're going to jump into adding another layer to this, and it's sometimes difficult to understand. Hopefully everybody's understanding what this is, but this is being recorded, so you could always come back and watch it later if you need to, and it will be posted up on the ShopBot website sometime within the next couple days. So now to add another layer to this is first just going to jump over to the drawing side again, and I'm going to make our project just a little bit bigger. Our job size is going to go into the job dimensions and set this up to 12 inches in the Y. Selecting OK. And at this point, we're going to go into the center tools and align it to the center. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Going to select all of the objects. Control Z is like the two best keystrokes ever. Wish that existed in all of life. So going into align to material, we're going to center that. And going back to the drawing size, and let's put in a larger letter P that is behind everything else. So take that and just scale that up to have a third layer to this process. And I'm going to cheat just a little bit here by not worrying about the height so much. I do need to stretch out this border. I'm going to hold the Shift key down as I stretch this border up. And by doing that, it is going to expand with the anchor point based on the center. So when I move it up, the bottom half moves down to the same amount. So our toolpaths that we already have calculated over here still exist, and they are existing currently in the incorrect position. So the first thing we want to do is just go ahead and recalculate everything that we've already calculated. And that is good. So now at least most of our toolpaths are set. To add this third layer, we're going to go into our layer tools. And the bottom layer is the only layer that I want to have turned on. I'm going to select everything here and do a right click. I'm going to copy to a new layer. And well, I've already used top and bottom. Maybe if I call this base, I'll understand that that is like the bottom of the bottom, the base layer. So we'll say OK to that, turning off the bottom layer. And it is current, so changing the base to also being a current layer. Going to go through the same process as we did originally. Going to select the text and everything that we want to have that merge with. So selecting everything there, selecting the weld. I'm going to get that same message. Do I want to make a copy and keep my original or replace it? I'm just going to hit replace. And there we have it. So that is what our base layer is going to be. Let's just do a Control Z on that. There's a couple things that got removed that I didn't want to have removed, like some objects here. So what we're going to do first, so just to point that out, what happened here. So pay attention to the letter, the inner side of this P. So selecting all of our text here and welding that together and replacing, we can see we've lost some detail. We want to be able to keep that. So I'm going to Control Z to undo. I only want to select the family and Patterson merge together. It's somewhat difficult to do here. So let's see. There we go. A left or right sweep motion does. And now I want to group that together. With that group together, selecting the P and now coming into the weld and replacing the vectors, we can see it has now kept our inner parts and everything that we wanted. This now allows us to create toolpaths for yet another layer. So coming back in here, I'm going to turn the border back on. Coming into do a pocketing toolpath and selecting everything that we have here. Only this time, we've already removed a total of 0.2 inches of material. So at this point, for the start depth, I'm going to do a 0.2 because that's where we're starting at that level. Coming down and clicking calculate. But before I do that, I'm going to try to keep myself organized and call that the base layer. Now I will preview. Actually, I have to reset the preview and do a preview all toolpaths once again. And we're going to see what this looks like. And again, if there's any questions of anything that we've done or anything I've shown, please ask it. Did everybody catch my mistake? Yes, it's a great thing for preview. This is why it is somewhat important to make that safe copy, which I did not do. So what I did, I just only merged the center or our first bottom layer in with everything. And so the when I finally did the final cutout, it kind of wiped out our top layer. So this is why it's somewhat important to try to keep that base layer and figure out what's going on here. So some of what was created got wiped out by not having all of our text and everything merged in here. Um, so let's see if it was just because I had some of that turned off, or did that really what happened? So do that and reset the preview, and this time just speed things up a little bit. We're going to change our simulation quality to standard and preview. Yeah, so that is what was done. And to help troubleshoot this, we're going to look at it in a way. Yeah, there we go. You can see when I shifted and centered things up, I didn't have everything in the right location. And that was it. But let's just slowly go through and figure out what went wrong. So the top layer does not have, the top layer is shifted down here. So that was mistake number one, and that's probably where it is. So this really needs to be moved up and sitting in the placement above here. So now the trick is, can we move that around to get that exactly? Let's do a calculate all, coming back to the preview window, resetting, and hopefully now we are almost good. So you can see how it is very easily, and how very easily it is to get lost in figuring out where everything is and what is happening. So again, scrolling through, we can see, yep, that's the top layer. That's what we want. For the bottom layer, that is also what we want. For the base layer, well, it's pocketing it out entirely. So let's fix that. We're talking about Control Z. It is very easily able to get completely in too much trouble with that Control Z. I did an undo one too many times. I'm going to group that together, select that P, do a weld, replace, back to the layer tab. I'm going to turn all of that back on, selecting the base. So there we go. So it is, as you can see, it is very difficult and hard to keep things straight and in line. So now we can see that we have our three different layers. Our top layer is at 0. Our next layer is at the minus 0.1. The blue layer here is a minus 0.2, and our base layer is at a minus 0.3. So keeping track and keeping an understanding of how these layers are organized and the naming of them is, in my opinion, the key to keeping it all together. Because if I did not have those in a clear naming convention, I would have been a little bit lost and would have had a little bit more trouble trying to backtrack where I made the mistake. So again, my mistakes were just not having the right objects selected. So yeah, I had a question coming in about changing the layer colors. Absolutely, that is another great way of keeping and understanding what is going on. So with all of these layers right here, here is our safe layer. At first, I could just maybe make that red, knowing that if I see any red in my drawing, that means that my safe layer is turned on. I probably don't want that. So we'll turn that off. And the top layer, we could match up maybe the layer colors similar to the same layer colors that we had for the toolpath. So there's that. The bottom layer is blue, and the base layer is also kind of a black. Didn't set it so it was black. So now that gives us a kind of a clearer view of what we're overlapping, so you can see what layers are turned on, what layers are turned off at a glance. So yes, coloring of the layers is very helpful as well. So one more final thing that I wanted to point out is we've only been working this with text. It works with any object just the same. So here is a design, just a little scroll. We could draw out a rectangle or a border that surrounds this. And let's draw in or create a pocketing toolpath for just this objects here, just to see what we have, what it's going to look like, and then we'll later add something in on top of it. Preview quality is turned up. Well, that's not so bad of a design. It's there. The tooling looks like it worked. And let's just add some text on top of this and merge that together. So we could just maybe do a capital P. And if you wanted to, you could always come down and change fonts. And any font that is on your computer is capable. And just to maybe get at our marketing department a little bit, and for those that enjoy Comic Sans, let's put a letter P in there, and we will select that and expand the size of that just by stretching it out. And going through the same process, our design is already grouped, selecting the letter P and coming over and, whoa, see, I'm already losing our core values, what I'm doing here. So we have to separate layers again. So again, I would right click, copy to a new layer and make it bottom. So now we have another layer here called bottom. I'm going to turn these two layers off. Selecting the letter P and coming in and doing a weld with the replace. Going back to the layers to turn our other layer on. Just so we could get to this object here, which is move to a new layer of border. And at this point, double clicking the same toolpath that I already had existing, selecting all of these objects. Should have reset the preview first, reset. Has some open vectors issues there, but that is all kind of understandable. And at that point, we would come back and turn the other layer on, selecting only that letter P and creating the only selecting the letter P and also turning that border on. And we could create another pocketing toolpath of another layer. Since I already had that one, let's just go half that. And that would be our secondary layer. So that is kind of a little bit on stacked text and stacked designs. And again, the key aspects of it here, I kind of rushed through this last part a little quick, but the key is keeping your layers or your levels organized and understanding what layers are associated with what drawings. So good ways of doing that. One is good naming conventions. Don't leave them labeled as layer one or bitmap layer. Be more descriptive with the names. I've also learned through one of your questions out there, coloring, giving a color or setting a color to that layer name. So with all of this done, does anyone have any questions on what we've done, or does anybody want to even criticize what I've done? I'm open to that. So there will be a recording for this, and if you haven't seen all of our recordings of past and previous are, you can find those on our ShopBot homepage, and clicking this button right here, we have it right up in front, trying to keep everybody somewhat social, even though we have to have our physical distance. Here, and you could see we have several videos that have been created over the past few weeks, and even some of our past presentations that you've already sat through and listened to are also sitting here. That's shopbottools.com and then virtual workshop. So yeah, inside corners or getting a clean edge on your text to see what it's really about detail and what bit diameters you have. You can't ever get a square inside corner. That's not going to happen. A couple things that you can do that might help. One is V carving. V carving on stacked text and layers like this is difficult. You really can't quite do it unless you do the top layer. But when you turn on, let's just take a look at the top layer here. I'm going to turn on only the bottom side here because this is where that 1/8 inch cutter is going through. So we could see this text is going around here, and just to keep it a little bit more clear, I'm going to turn off all of the layers except for that top. So with that layer turned on, we could come up here to the visibility and toggle the toolpath from the wireframe to a solid. And this allows us to see, this blue line here allows us to see the exactly where that bit is covering. So in this case, that 1/8 inch cutter did a pretty good job of getting in here and removing some material. Now, if you were really critical about this and we needed to have a sharper corner in here, there's a couple ways of doing it. One is just use a smaller cutter. But that means that you might not want to use a smaller cutter for everything. So it could be the case where for this top layer, you may want to just do a profile toolpath around only the text. So let's just give that a shot. So we're going to do a profile toolpath around the text, and remembering that we were 0.1 deep. Gonna clean that up with a 16th inch end mill on the outside and top clean and calculate. So we can now see, turn off this layer here and see that that 16th inch bit is able to get in a little bit more detail. There, so it's really about to get the detail or the inside corners is all about the bit diameter. So the smaller the bit, the more square looking the part's going to appear. So I hope that helps answer that question. Yeah, so in the stacked text layer like this, saving out these toolpaths, I would probably group the toolpaths by bit diameter. So we could see that we have, for this job, 3 different bits here. They are organized right now in connection with one another. So there's a 1/4 inch. All of these clears are done with the 1/4 inch, and all of these bottom layers that don't have the bracketed clear is the 1/8 inch cutter. So when saving the toolpaths, coming in and only highlighting the 1/4 inch cutters, I would probably be all right with that. And then save all the 1/4 inch cutters together once you save those, and then come in and only select the toolpaths that use the 1/8 inch cutter, save those out. And then if there's any others like the 16th inch, save that out separately. So in this file, we could possibly have 3 separate files, or 3 separate, 3 separate files for the 3 separate bits. I don't see much of a need to completely 100% cut each layer as you're cutting down. It's a lot of tool changes back and forth. I think it would work out just fine doing all of the 1/4 inch at the different levels, and then coming back in with the 1/8 inch and also doing all of the different levels. Now, one thing to think about when you're doing that is the location of where you zeroed your bit. So we're using 2 different bits to pocket out or remove material that is at the same level. So this clear layer and then this top layer is also both cutting at the same level of that 0.1. So to make sure that we don't see like a little outline tool where it goes around, touch off of the 0 plate, placing the 0 plate in the same location on your material as you did previously. So if you're lucky enough to have a tool changer, I would think about the same thing. Do everything with the 1/4, then all of the 1/8 inch, keeping the bits selected together. Even though we have a tool changer, a tool change does take a little bit of time. There's maybe 20 seconds, 15, 20 seconds for the tool change to happen. So having them grouped together is still going to reduce the amount of tool changes that are happening. So I would probably still keep them grouped together based on the tools, although we would have to keep save them in one file for a tool changer. It probably wouldn't affect the quality a whole lot, mainly because the top layer, we'll just preview the differences here. The top layer and the bottom layer, so this is the 1/4 inch cutter that's coming around, and you can see that it's never coming in contact with our actual lettering, edge of the letter, that is being taken care of the final pass here. So the quality shouldn't be affected too much by the um, order of that. Now the grain chipping, that is kind of handled and should be handled with the um, climb versus conventional. If we are working with lumber, climb is what you'll be wanting to use and not a conventional. The climb would give a smoother, cleaner cut in the product. And you might have noticed when you do a rastering pocketing toolpath, as you're cutting down, you'll see one side uh, producing nice clean little chips, and as it comes in the other direction, it kind of gets fuzzy. So if you want to test a climb conventional, just get some lumber and do a pocketing using a raster pattern, and you'll see the two different directions of that cut, how that affects the edge quality. But the biggest difference in getting the edge quality right is climb versus conventional and getting your RPM and feed rate set correctly. So keeping things aligned after a tool change. Well, everything should just be already aligned. So there shouldn't be anything to have to keep in alignment after that. So um, yeah, the main thing is the Z0, zeroing it off of the same location every time, and then also not moving uh, your product and your material on the table. So as long as your product and your material didn't move, it's not going to go anywhere. Hope to see you again next week, and thank you for joining us.